teenager, a young teenager in the 1960s, still wearing spectacles, I started to feel a strong urge to find out what life was really about, where I came from, and where I was going. I started to crave some sort of spiritual spectacles, if you like. So it is said in the Vedanta Sutras, although I didn't know this verse at that time, Tat Vijnanakam Sa Gurum Eva Abhigachet Samit Panihi Srotriyam Brahma Nishtam. It is said that to learn spiritual subject matters, one must approach the Guru or the spiritual master. So in my last years of high school in Sydney, at the end of the 60s, as if by magic, a school friend of mine introduced me to the early members of the Hare Krishna movement in Australia. And I bought my first copy of Bhagavad Gita. Actually, it was my second copy. My first copy of Bhagavad Gita was a tiny penguin edition, which I found very difficult to understand. So this Bhagavad Gita as it is by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, who's the founder, Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And Bhagavad Gita is also known as Gita Upanishad, and it's the essence of all Vedic knowledge and one of the most important Upanishads in Vedic literature. The speaker of Bhagavad Gita is Krishna. That's Krishna then with a bluish black complexion, colour of a monsoon cloud, and that's Arjuna, his friend and a disciple. So Bhagavad Gita is spoken by Krishna and it is heard attentively by Arjuna. And by hearing from Krishna, Arjuna was able to understand 5 topics: who God is, who we are, what nature and the world is, what time is, and what is karma or activities. So you could say that Arjuna, after hearing from Krishna, he was able to get his spiritual specs on, his spiritual spectacles were, he was able to see life through the lens of spiritual knowledge. So as a young boy, living at home with my mother and father and my 2 sisters, please come and sit down. I read the Bhagavad Gita. It wasn't this copy of Bhagavad Gita, although it was written by Srila Prabhupada, but at that time Prabhupada had presented a translation of Bhagavad Gita which was taken up by the Mela company, but they didn't agree to publish the whole Gita because it's too big for them, so they published what's known as an abridged version. So it was an abridged version of Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada was reluctant, but he went ahead because he wanted some Bhagavad Gita out there. So it was the abridged version of Bhagavad Gita, and I just turned 18 at the time, and shortly after that I moved into the temple in Sydney, became a young monk, and I looked sort of like Dina Dayal here. I was actually almost as handsome as Dina Dayal. I was slender build. I was a much more slender build in those days. I was skinny, well, not skinny, you're well built, but I was slender, and somehow or other things changed after that. But I took initiation from Srila Prabhupada in May of 1971, and I received the name Kurma Das. I remember at my initiation ceremony, Prabhupada told me that Kurma Das means servant of Krishna. One of Krishna's names, he said, is Kurma. And that's all he said. He asked me how old I was, and I said I was 18. He said, oh, so young. I said, yes. So I soon found out that the name Kurma referred to the tortoise, gigantic original tortoise avatar of Krishna. Krishna in the form of a gigantic tortoise, and his pastimes in the form of kurma are described in the beautiful Srimad Bhagavatam. So, one evening all those long years ago in Sydney, almost 50 years ago, in our daily evening classes on Bhagavad Gita, in the tiny little shopfront temple there in Sydney, we read this verse. I've got it here in my notes. This is verse 58 from chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. You may be familiar with this verse. I'll read it to you. Yada sangharate chayam kurmon gani vasarvashaha indriyan indriyate bhyas tasya pragya pratistita. The translation of that is one who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. I'll read that again. One who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. And I'll read you Srila Prabhupada's purport or explanation of this verse. Purport. The test of a yogi, devotee, or self-realized soul is that he is able to control the senses according to his plan. Most people, however, are servants of the senses and are thus directed by the dictation of the senses. The senses are compared to venomous serpents. They want to act very loosely, without restriction. The yogi, or the devotee, must be very strong to control the serpents, like a snake charmer. He never allows them to act independently. There are many injunctions in the revealed scriptures. Some of them are do-nots, and some of them are do's. Unless one is able to follow the do's and do-nots, restricting oneself from sense enjoyment, it is not possible to be firmly fixed in Krishna consciousness. The best example set herein is the tortoise. The tortoise can at any moment wind up its senses and exhibit them again at any time for particular purposes. Similarly, the senses of the Krishna conscious persons are used only for some particular purpose in the service of the Lord and are withdrawn otherwise. Arjuna is being taught here to use his senses for the service of the Lord instead of his own gratification. Keeping the senses always in the service of the Lord is the example set by the analogy of the tortoise who keeps his senses within. So, end of purport. So this became one of my favourite verses of the Gita, not the least because it had my name in it, Kurma. And it was an easy verse for me to meditate on and for me to remember. The example of the tortoise is being used here by means of an analogy. This analogy is actually given by God himself. Krishna is speaking this verse. So it's a very special, powerful analogy. As I read more and more Srila Prabhupada's books as the years went on, I found many analogies in Prabhupada's books. I used to really like discovering new ones. In fact, I even looked up the word analogy in the back, in the index to all the books that I read, to find more analogies, because they're listed there. If you look up analogy in the index, you'll find dozens and dozens of them. I just like analogies. Why did I like analogies so much? I still like them, and I welcome them when I read them. And most people like analogies because by an analogy, one is able to understand something which is normally very difficult to understand but it's by the use of the analogy one can understand it better. So analogy, as you know, is a comparison between something which is quite different. It's compared to something which is quite different from itself. But by understanding the analogy, something which is maybe unfamiliar or complex can be easily understood by comparing it to something familiar. In other words, we all know what a tortoise looks like, we all know how tortoises behave, and you've probably seen that when a tortoise is in danger, immediately its head and its arms and legs, or I guess they're 4 legs, they all just are drawn back inside the shell very quickly. And because the shell of the tortoise is very hard, it can protect itself. So let's unpack, this is a very popular term these days, but I'll indulge in it. Let's unpack this analogy of the tortoise. The tortoise moves very slowly, so it's easy prey for faster moving creatures. And in the wild world, as we know, one living being is food for another. And so by nature's arrangement, because the tortoise moves very slowly, by God's arrangement, it's been given a very hard shell. So Mr. and Mrs. Tortoise, whenever they're in danger, they can simply pull in their arms and legs and head, and even though there's a big hungry fox or something there to eat it, it can't. Armadillos do the same thing. They roll themselves up into a ball and they're like steel. They're like a ball of stainless steel. They look like stainless steel. And you just can't get inside. And all the soft, sensitive, important parts of the armadillo or the tortoise are all packed away inside. So in this analogy that Krishna gives, our 5 senses, which in Sanskrit are called Rupa, Rasa, Sabda, Gandha and Sparsha. The sense of touch, the sense of sight, the sense of hearing, the sense of tasting, and the sense of smelling, which are all connected with the nose, the ears, the eyes, the skin, and the ears. I think I covered them all. The tongue, yes. They're all compared to the arms and legs of the tortoise. So the arms and legs of the tortoise are compared to our 5 senses. So Krishna is explaining to Arjuna and he's encouraging Arjuna to become a yogi. He says, Yogo Yukta Bhavarjuna. Yoga Yukto Bhavarjuna. Become a yogi, O Arjuna. So he's encouraging Arjuna to become a yogi, and he gives him various scenarios of different types of yogis. He explains the Ashtanga yoga process, but Arjuna frankly says that that's too difficult for me. But anyway, a yogi is one who controls the senses. There are different types of yoga, there are different ways of approaching this system of controlling the senses. So whatever sort of yogi you are, you will endeavour to not allow your senses to run wild. So if there is some danger in his meditation, some distraction, the yogi, something might have caught his eye, or there was some beautiful aroma, some hunger to taste something nice, or to touch something, hear some attractive sound. The yogi protects himself from distraction by bringing his senses within. He doesn't use his senses, he doesn't misuse his senses by wasting them on the temporary pleasures of this world. So that is the yoga path. So the analogy is that just when a tortoise is in danger, he withdraws his limbs. So similarly, when a yogi is in danger of being distracted from the yoga path, he withdraws his mind and his senses, and he goes in. He brings them inside into that safe place. We all have a safe place that we sometimes need to return to. So we can become a tortoise in that way. So for the practitioners of Bhakti Yoga, and that's what we do here in the Hare Krishna movement, the senses are not denied. We're not saying deny the senses, interaction with the sense objects, but the senses are used in God's service. The tortoise has his arms and his legs and his head, and he uses them every day. He gets around, albeit slowly, and he has his head, and with his head he looks around, looks for food, looks for a mate, and looks for a place to sleep. So a tortoise, he uses his senses. Similarly, we don't deny our senses, but we try to use them properly. Just like we have a tongue, and the tongue has two functions. The functions of the tongue is to vibrate and to taste. So the bhakti yogi, he needs to eat just like everyone else, but he only allows himself pure, clean, sanctified vegetarian food. So for the practitioner of bhakti yoga, one doesn't allow himself to eat anything at any time. He doesn't eat foods that are made from fermented liquors like alcohol, and he doesn't eat foods that are made from flesh and blood. But he eats only Krishna prasad, delicious, life-giving, juicy, succulent Hare Krishna cooking, which is what you'll be getting tonight. So the conviction of the bhakti yogi is to not eat, but only eat things which are going to help us advance on the path of bhakti. And that decision to only do that is our tortoise moment, if you like. We made that decision. No, I'm not going to stop at McDonald's on the way home. No, I'm not going to eat this and that. I'm not going to drop into the pub and have a pint because I'd like to be a Hare Krishna, and I know Hare Krishnas don't do that. So, and you have that conviction, that's your tortoise moment. So we say no to things which are not good for us. And for a devotee that's been practicing bhakti for some time, it's not a difficult thing, it comes naturally. Just like the tortoise doesn't have to think very hard when it's time to withdraw its senses, just pulls them in as a matter of course. So as Krishna says here, one who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. So I really like that example. It's very clear and vivid. So there are many wonderful, enlightening moments you will experience if you read Prabhupada's books. We have the Bhagavad Gita itself, and then we have Srimad Bhagavatam, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So many wonderful books. Prabhupada wrote almost 80 books, 80 volumes of books, and I guarantee if you read Srila Prabhupada's books every day, you'll have these wonderful, enlightening moments. My wife and I are reading Bhagavad Gita every evening, and not long ago we finished the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And in one of those verses of the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, I found more about tortoises. And I thought, oh, I remember this verse. Prabhupada quotes it in the purport, and I thought, I had my tortoise moment, and I thought, I think I'll make this the subject of my Sunday feast class. So there's another verse, and then I read in the Brihad Bhagavatam this verse is also quoted, and it's, I thought, yes, this is a very, very interesting verse. I'll read it to you. This is a verse from the Padma Purana, which is one of the most famous of the 18 Puranas of the Vedic library. And here's another verse about tortoises. Darshana dhyana sangsparshair matsya kulma vihangamaha swani apatyani pushnanti kataham api padmaja. And this is a verse spoken by Krishna himself, just like the verse I read from the Gita. This is a verse spoken by Krishna to Lord Brahma. And the translation of this verse is, by vision, by meditation, and by touch only do the fish, the tortoise, and the birds maintain their offspring. Similarly, do I also, O Padmaja. Now Prabhupada explains this verse as follows. Quote, the fish brings up its offspring simply by looking at them. The tortoise brings up its offspring simply by meditation. The eggs of the tortoise are laid on land, and the tortoise meditates on the eggs while in the water. Similarly, the devotees in Krishna consciousness, although far away from the Lord's abode can elevate themselves to that abode simply by thinking of Him constantly, by engagement in Krishna consciousness. The devotee does not feel the pangs of material miseries. This state of life is called Brahma Nirvana, or the absence of material miseries due to being constantly immersed in the Supreme. Unquote. So I've read the Gita a few times, so this wasn't the first time that I read that nice verse in the purport. But I often try to understand what it meant. I actually I wondered why this ancient Vedic example, because remember the Puranas are millions of years old, why that it mentions the word tortoises, because I thought that the tortoise and the turtle were two different creatures. And it seemed to me that this was a sea turtle that was being described, because it mentions how the tortoise lays the eggs on the beach and then goes to the sea. So I was presuming that this was talking about a sea turtle, which lays its eggs on the beach, not the tortoise. But on further research recently, I discovered, according to modern botany, not botany actually, biology, even though there is a meaningful difference between tortoises and other turtles, it seems that turtles and tortoises are the same in many ways. In fact, it is said that all tortoises are turtles, but not all turtles are tortoises. You have to get your head around that one. All tortoises are turtles, but not all turtles are tortoises. But despite their differences, they both belong to the same family group. It's called Testudines. That's the botanical order, means that they all have a hard, bony shell covering their body. So I thought, fair enough. It seems that the ancient sages really, they knew their marine biology, if you like. So, trying to understand this tortoise analogy, I remember that when I was a young lad, I watched a documentary on the TV presented by David Attenborough about sea turtles and how they lay their eggs. And it started to make sense. This example of the turtles laying their eggs on the beach made more sense. So bear with me here, I'll tell you the story. In the summertime, when the weather is warm, the pregnant sea turtles return to the beach because they live in the sea. Actually, tortoises, they have legs like little elephant legs, you know? They're like stumpy, and they've got little nails on their legs, and they walk like that, so like mini elephant legs. But turtles don't have legs like that, they have flippers. So that's one of the differences. So what happens is, in the summer, the pregnant sea turtle, she returns to the beach. And the amazing thing is that she returns to the very same beach where she was hatched as a little baby turtle, many years before. So, and it was a point of discussion on the documentary. How do they remember one beach from another? They're living in the sea, yet they always come back to the same beach, the exact same beach that they were born on. And I was thinking, they were just newly born hatchlings. They'd just come out of their little eggs, and they rushed to the sea, but somehow or other they remembered the exact beach. So I was thinking, this is quite amazing. Even though we can't remember what we were doing when we were born from the womb. We don't remember those first moments or that first hour or two after being born. And we have much bigger brains than the turtle, but the turtles do. So the scientists, their description of this, their explanation of this is that it is just instinct. Instinct, which is really a meaningless word. It's not an explanation at all, it's just a word meaning we don't know. We don't know how this happens. How do the birds that fly across the planet and then come back again, just like there's certain birds that fly out of Ireland at a certain time of the year. What are they? Are they the starlings or the
Sparrows.
Huh?
Sparrows.
Sparrows? Yeah, but there's swifts. There's swifts. The swifts. Like the friend of mine who's a taxi driver, he said he has a shed, and the swifts live in that shed, and then they fly to South America or somewhere, and then they come right back. The same swifts come right back to the same spot in his shed, hidden behind the stables, and they come back there and lay their eggs, and they come back at the same time, and they come back to the exact same house in the same country, thousands of miles away. And the scientists say, well, this is instinct, it's instinct, which means they don't know what it is, so they use that word to describe it. So back to the story. The pregnant turtle swims through the crashing surf and she crawls up the beach, searching for a nesting spot above the high water mark. In other words, she doesn't want to lay her eggs in a spot that's going to get washed away. So she knows somehow that that's far above the highest tide, and then she makes a hole in the sand with her back flippers. She turns around and with her back flippers digs a very deep hole in the sand, and she digs a very deep nest, and then she squats over it and she lays 100 or so eggs into the big hole in the sand. Plop, 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 all the eggs fall out. She covers it all the eggs up with her back flippers, and then she goes back to the sea, drags herself back to the ocean. She's exhausted, she's just given birth to 100 babies, and it's a long way down to the beach, and she goes back to the ocean. And there she waits for at least 60 days. And meanwhile, the eggs are sitting in the sand, deep down under the beach. But you have to remember that in these spots where there's turtles, there's hundreds and hundreds of turtles all come out of the sea at the same time. And they all lay their eggs in these particular spots. So there's 100 nests, or 200 or 500 nests, and in each of those nests there's at least 100 babies. And if the temperature of the sand is cool, then more males are born, and if the temperature of the sand is warm, more females are born. So finally, when the tiny turtles are ready to hatch, they all do so in unison. How is that possible? They do it in unison. The marine biology, and they filmed it all, and all of a sudden, at the time of the full moon, all of a sudden, when the babies are ready to be born, all of a sudden, they all come out of the sand, and they spill out all over the beach. It's described like boiling water, over boiling in a pot. And out they come, 100 there, and another 100 over there, and another 100 there, and they spill out in unison, exactly at the same time. How is that possible? And it's instinct. And they spill out, and they run towards the beach and towards the sea, and they know exactly where the sea is. How do they know? They've just been born and they're only this big, but they all head in the right direction. They look at the reflection of the moon and the stars on the water, and they all run very quickly at the same time. And the reason that the scientists explain is that they all run at the same time is that because at the time they're born, there's all sorts of hungry animals ready there to eat them. Because for them it's like a huge feast. It's feast time, foxes and other predators. So they all take their birth at the same time, and then they just run towards the ocean to minimize being eaten. Because the more of them there are, the more the predators, that's their guess. So they run the gauntlet, and they run down to the sea, and they swim out, and they find some clumps of seagrass, and they spend years hiding and living in the seagrass until they grow up, and then they can become mother turtles themselves. So that's your natural history class tonight. That's the life cycle of the turtle. Now, what am I talking about here? Let's zoom in on this example that Krishna gives to Lord Brahma. So the turtle/tortoise lays her eggs in the sand, then crawls back to the beach, and she waits in the ocean, and she's meditating. She's meditating on her babies. All mothers meditate on their babies. If you're a human mother, then you know there's 9 months. You're meditating. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? I wonder if she's going to have blue eyes or brown eyes. And you've got all the clothes all sorted out, and you've got a little bed, and you've got it all. So you're constantly meditating. So this is a natural maternal instinct. So the turtle is meditating, hoping that everything's okay, and she's meditating on her eggs. And that's the only connection that she has with her babies. They're a long distance away. The turtle is a long way away in the ocean somewhere, and her babies are all under the sand on the beach. So she's hoping and praying for their protection. So she doesn't see them again until they swim out and meet her. So apparently, another amazing fact is each of those babies know exactly who their mother turtle is. Now there's hundreds of turtles waiting there in the ocean for the reunion, the grand reunion, and every baby turtle knows exactly who their mother is. And their mother, the mother knows which baby turtle is mine and which baby turtle is not mine. And you have to remember that there's thousands of little babies splashing out the sea to meet their mothers. I was thinking it's probably like when you pick up your kids, when the mother picks up her kids from school, and she's there in the car park with all the other mothers, they've all got their cars, and it's time to pick up the kids, especially the young kids, and they've only been at school maybe for a few weeks. And all the mothers know exactly who their kids are, and the kids know who their mother is. You don't accidentally pick up the wrong kid and take them. Oh, sorry. So somehow or other, each individual turtle knows exactly who their little baby is, and vice versa. This is an amazing fact. So let's revisit this verse. The verse says, "By vision, by meditation, and by touch only do the fish, the tortoise, and the birds maintain their offspring. Similarly, do I also, O Padmaja." Krishna is calling Lord Brahma Padmaja. He's referring to Lord Brahma, who he's speaking to as Padmaja. Padmaja means one who is born from a lotus. Padma means lotus, and Ja means the source of birth, Jayate. So Lord Brahma actually has no mother. Lord Brahma is born from a lotus, a giant lotus that grows out of God's navel. So you may say, what? That's just too much. How can you be born out of a lotus that grows out of God's navel? So you may say, oh, that's too much. How can you believe this? But if you can believe that pregnant sea turtles find the very same beach where they were born and return to it, they lay their eggs, and then after the eggs hatch and the baby turtles run down to the sea, the mother eggs and the mother turtle and the baby turtle, they all meet each other, and there's a happy ending in that regard. If you can accept that, then you can certainly accept that there are many things that are beyond our comprehension, including being born from a giant lotus. So, that's the analogy. The eggs of the tortoise are laid on land, and the tortoise meditates on the eggs, and by her firm meditation on her babies, there's a happy ending and they all meet up. After the intense meditation, mother and babies are united. And in the same way, Krishna says, the devotee in his meditation on Krishna, although far, far away from the Lord's abode, can elevate himself to that abode simply by thinking of Krishna constantly, by engagement in Krishna consciousness. And eventually, Krishna and his beloved devotees will be reunited, just like the mother turtle and the baby turtles. Not only do the devotees meditate on Krishna constantly in separation from him, but Krishna is always thinking about his devotees. Sanatana Goswami mentions that in the Brihad Bhagavatam, that the mother turtle can be compared to Krishna, who is always longing for the day that his spiritual babies return to his shelter. So similarly, we don't belong in this dangerous world. And at the appointed time, due to the mercy of Krishna, the divine plan maker, in due course of time, we will return to our real home. For the sea turtle, home means to swim free in the ocean. And for the devotee, home is to swim free in the spiritual sky. So you may be thinking, didn't today's class mention something else about fish and birds also? You're right. So the Padma Purana verse mentions 3 animals, the fish, the tortoise and the bird. So we've spoken about tortoises. By vision, by meditation, and by touch only do the fish, the tortoise, and the birds maintain their offspring. Similarly do I also, O Padmaja. So let's explain the rest of this example. Fish. Fish, of course, they give birth to their offspring in the ocean because that's the only place. They don't have any other place to go. The sea turtles, they can walk on the land and they can swim in the sea, but the fish don't have that benefit. So what happens is when the fish gives birth to its offspring, it gives birth to thousands of eggs at a time. The tortoise or the turtle gives birth to about 100 eggs, but when the fish gives birth, thousands of little babies are there, but they're in a certain unfertilized state. The fish gives birth to eggs and then they're fertilized outside of the body, and the father is there to fertilize them as soon as they come out. And then the mother fish waits patiently and keeps the baby eggs of the fish in her vision, whereas the tortoise is meditating on these babies that are under the sand on the beach a long, long way away. The fish and the babies are right close to each other, but the babies are tiny little baby fish eggs, and the fish is there and she's looking at them. Doesn't take her eyes off them. For the whole gestational period, from when there's a fish egg to when it actually turns into a fish. And by her determined gaze, the young are finally able to swim on their own and live their lives. So of course, marine biologists have studied the lives of fish, and they've concluded that there's a lot of them. In fact, the Puranas declare that there are 900,000 species of fish in the sea. Padma Purana explains, Jalaja Navalakshani, there are 9 lakhs of species of fish in the ocean. 900,000 species. So, in the intense endeavour to bring up the baby fish, some mother fish don't only guard them by putting them in a spot underneath a coral reef or some little hiding place where the big animals, the big fish, won't come and eat them. Some babies, some mother fish carry around the baby fish in their mouths, and they're sometimes seen exhaling. There's certain types of fish they'll exhale. There's a 500 fish, baby tiny fish come out of her mouth. She checks them out. Yeah, they're doing okay, just like you have a baby. And she's in her little room, and you have a little camera and a little microphone to check if the baby's okay. You can hear her crying, or there's a little camera there. Oh yes, she's tossing and turning. So the mother wants to know how the fish are doing. She just lets them swim out of her mouth for a little bit, checks them out. Yeah, they're all doing okay. And then she sucks them back into her mouth. So she keeps them in her mouth. Some species of fish, they have big mouths, and the babies are very little. And the mother has to undergo very big austerities because during that whole time she can't eat. So she fasts for like however long it takes. That's some of the austerities of motherhood. Anyway, the point of the analogy of the fish is that the mother fish waits patiently alongside the developing baby fish, never taking her eyes off her babies until the baby fish can swim away. And so in the same way that the mother fish accompanies the baby fish in their long journey from egg to fish, Krishna, he's dwelling within as Antaryami or Paramatma or Super Soul. Actually, there are 2 souls within the body. 2 souls within every body. Did you know that? There is ourselves, the individual soul, the Atma, and sitting next to us is Paramatma, the Antaryami, the witness, Krishna in the form of Paramatma, who's waiting patiently, observing everything that we do, just like the mother fish is watching her little offspring. So just like the mother turtle brings up her babies by meditation, and just like Krishna who's always there alongside us in the heart, observing everything we do, similarly the mother fish brings up its babies by simply looking at them, observing them. So the third part of today's talk, and the third part of the analogy that Krishna is giving to Lord Brahma, is that the mother bird brings up its babies by what? Touch. By touch. Now, as you probably know, bird life is very difficult. Bird life is very tough. We've got a bird feeder outside our window at home, and you get to see what it's like to be a bird. In fact, being any sort of living being in this dangerous world is difficult, but you see it very, very clearly when you look at the animals, and especially the birds. Have you ever seen a bird eating? The bird's eating, but while it's eating, it grabs a peanut and it's looking everywhere. Is someone coming to eat me? Someone coming to eat me? That's what's going on. The bird is looking, his head's moving up, down, left, right, behind, because there are predators that come and just devour them, just while they're having their dinner. Can you imagine getting up in the morning and sitting down at the breakfast table and thinking any moment someone's going to burst through the door and just some huge big creature's going to burst through the door, grab us away from the breakfast table and just eat us. So that's what it's like being a bird. It's a very difficult life. So, but even in the human species of life, defending ourselves is an issue. It may be not quite as severe as in the animal kingdom, but we have to put alarms on our houses, we have to lock the doors at night. Of course, it didn't always used to be like that, and there are maybe some places on earth where people still don't lock their doors, but generally speaking, we alarm our house, we put locks on the doors. If we're living in places like South Africa, we have to have barbed wire fences and 24-hour armed guards. That's for real. And we may, as well as the safety cameras, we may have even a weapon underneath the bed, because we need to defend ourselves against attack. So similarly, in the bird world, there is much intrigue, and the birds are always fearful. I remember last summer, my wife and I went to Sweden, and because we were invited to, I was invited to cater for the Northern European Bhagavatam Trust yearly meetings. So we were there, and it was summertime, and so in Sweden in the summertime the sun really doesn't go down. So it looks like this at midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And so I remember getting up early to chant, and it was like 3 o'clock, and I was walking outside and I heard the cuckoo. You know how the cuckoo, I won't give you a cuckoo imitation, I won't embarrass myself, but the cuckoo has a very beautiful song. In fact, many poets and musicians have written pieces of music dedicated to the cuckoo. There's Frederick Delius wrote a piece called On Hearing the First Song of the Cuckoo. It's very romantic to write poems and to write musical pieces dedicated to the wonders of nature. So the cuckoo. But I was shocked to find out that recently that the cuckoo is like the most maligned of all the birds in the bird kingdom. The cuckoo has a double life. The cuckoo, in fact, doesn't, even though it has a beautiful song, it doesn't build a nest, but it lays its eggs in other birds' nests. And when it does so, it kicks out all the other birds' eggs that are there and just deposits its own egg. And the mother, who laid her eggs in that nest, thinks that that's her egg. So she brings up the cuckoo's eggs. So the cuckoo doesn't need to get a nest, because it just drops off all its eggs in other birds' nests. And then when the cuckoo is born, the baby cuckoo is like huge, very big. And so you have these birds, and sometimes the cuckoo doesn't throw out all the eggs. So the eggs are born, and there's a little bird and a little bird, and there's this gigantic cuckoo baby. And the mother's thinking, is this really one of my babies? But because the mother bird is very motherly and very affectionate, the mother presumes that it is her egg, is her baby, so she brings it up anyway. So the cuckoos don't have to worry about. The cuckoo is like the most irresponsible parent, the ultimate irresponsible parent. Just drops his eggs off somewhere else. Bye, you look after him. But anyway, despite all the avian shenanigans, baby birds are sat on to keep them warm by the parents, or in the case of the cuckoo, the surrogate parents, who make it their life and soul to make sure that that baby egg hatches into a baby bird. So Krishna is saying, just by touch, the mother, sometimes actually the father, in some species the mother goes away and leaves the father to sit on the eggs. So there's quite a lot of variety in the bird world. But either way, either mother or father is there to sit on the eggs at the appropriate time so that they're kept warm, so that the eggs will be born. So Krishna says similarly, just like well, I'll give you an example. The bird, in Sanskrit, one of the names of a bird is Dvija. The Sanskrit word Dvija means many things, but it actually technically means twice born. Dvija. Dvi means two, and ja means born. So the bird is called Dvija because the first birth of the bird is as an egg, pops out of the mother as an egg, and then when it's time, out of the egg comes the bird. So it's actually two births for a bird. So similarly, the Vedas explain that we are within the eggshell of ignorance. And when we come out from the shell of ignorance, that is our second birth. So we're born, but when we're born, we don't know very much. In fact, you have to go to school and you have to learn everything. You have to learn how to walk, you have to learn how to eat properly, you have to learn not to put your face in your dinner, that you actually meant to pick it up with a spoon, and you have to learn all of these things. So we're born in ignorance. So the Vedas explain that when we come out from the shell of our ignorance, this is our second birth, and it describes the specific meaning of Dvija, that the first birth is from our mother and father, and we also can be born twice, Dvija. Second birth is by the Guru and the Vedic knowledge. By the Guru and the Vedic knowledge. Vedic knowledge is compared to the mother, and the spiritual master, the Guru, is compared to the father. So summing up today's class, today we found out that we can learn important life lessons from all creatures, even the humble birds, the fish, and the tortoises. From the example of the birds, we learn two lessons. That if we learn to rely on him, Krishna will always take care of us, just like the mother bird who patiently sits on her eggs to keep them warm until they hatch. Baby birds don't have to worry. They just know that their mother will always provide for them. They just sit there in their nest, open up their mouth, and there comes mum or dad with a little worm or something that they've collected, and they get fed. They don't have to worry. I wonder if we're going to get any food today. They don't have to worry. Similarly, Krishna provides for and protects his children. We're all children of Krishna. And we will be protected and we will be provided for, especially if we're dependent on him. The mother bird, the baby birds are completely dependent on mother and father bird, or whoever's doing the collection of the food. They're completely dependent. They can't fly. They can't get out of the nest. If something happens to the mother or the father, they'll die of starvation. They're completely dependent on their parents. So similarly, the devotee of Krishna is very dependent and on Krishna, and he knows that Krishna will always protect me. That is one of the items of surrender. Rakshisyatiti vishvaso gotritve varanam tata. Krishna will always protect me, and Krishna will always provide for me. So the other second lesson we learn from the birds is that they're born twice. And that when a bird finally emerges from its shell, that is its second birth. And that similarly, when we come out of ignorance, the shell of our ignorance, and if we're very fortunate, we can get trained up by our guru, a spiritual master, and here the Vedic literature, that is our spiritual mother and our spiritual father. We have our mother and father, birth father, and then we have our spiritual mother, the Vedas, and we have our spiritual father, the spiritual master. And from the fish we learnt one lesson, that is, that just like the tiny baby dependent fish who's living in a very fierce, dangerous ocean, it's brought up just by the affectionate glances of the mother fish. Similarly, Krishna loves us, and as Antaryami, as the super soul, he's watching us at every step of our life. And finally, from the tortoise, we learn two lessons. First lesson we learn from the tortoise, for those who missed the story of the life of the tortoise. One who is able, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, to withdraw his senses from sense objects, as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell, is perfectly fixed in perfect consciousness, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. In other words, if we want to reduce life's troubles, we should learn the art of not running here and there to gratify our senses, our hungry senses, which will never be satisfied. Rather, we should learn the art of withdrawing our senses, just like the tortoise withdraws its limbs into its hard shell. And that is the art of finding real happiness. And the second lesson we learn from the tortoise is, in the tortoise's form as a sea turtle, just like the sea turtle travels far away from her home in the ocean and lays her eggs on the beach, but is always thinking of those babies that are buried deep in the sand and looking forward when the time comes when they will rejoin her in the ocean. Similarly, Krishna is always thinking of us as tiny souls lost in this material world, and he's awaiting the day that we can finally emerge from the sands of ignorance, the sands of forgetfulness, and finally make that run down to the ocean and swim free to meet Krishna in the spiritual sky. So we'll finish there. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yes, Gunnar.
Talking about withdrawing the senses from the sense object.
Yes.
Is there any practical trick that
Yes, good question. It's a good question because I didn't actually mention it in the class. We've got a bit of musical accompaniment for this question. So, well done. Yes, that's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked it because I was meant to talk about this. How is it? Okay. What do you do when you feel this urge to go and do something which you know isn't good? You know, if you go and you know, the mind is saying, I'm not saying that you have this problem, Glenara, but let's say you have this urge to go to the pub, and you think, oh, you know, each time I go to the pub, I drink too much, I come out and I'm all dizzy and I smell from all the cigarettes, I meet up with all these really bad dudes, they're swearing and this and that, and then I'm drunk, and I go and do all these things that I regret, and I really don't want to do it, but I'm forced to do it. And the senses force us to do so many things. The senses say, go and eat this, and you say, I shouldn't eat that, that's just rubbish. You know, I'm a vegetarian, what would I want to eat that for? But then the mind says, go on, just a little. It's like if sometimes you have friends that are not vegetarians, and you go and eat. Sometimes, I used to, a long time ago, visit people in their homes that weren't vegetarians, and they would say, I made some nice vegetarian food for you, and you look at it, and it's little tiny bits of looks like bacon, looks like eggs or something, And they say, oh, don't worry, it's just a little bit. It's just a little bit. And you say, well, what do you mean it's just a little bit? It's just, I'm a vegetarian. No, but it's just a little bit. So the mind is tricking you all the time. And sometimes people say, oh, okay, I'll have some. But so in other words, the mind is tricking you, eat this, go there, drink this, and you know it's not good. So the way that one develops in his spiritual life is that he learns the art of getting a higher taste. In other words, you go and you walk past the pub and then you think, should I go in? And you say, no, I'm going to go to the Hare Krishna temple tonight and I'm going to have some of their fantastic food. And I know I'm going to feel much better when I go there. So forget the pub, I'm going to the temple and I'm going to have prasadam. So you have something better. You have something better and you know that it's better and you know that you're going to feel much better. So you develop a higher taste. Just like when you're young, you play with, I remember I used to play with toy soldiers. And I had this huge toy soldier collection. And I used to have thousands of little toy soldiers. And then one day, all of a sudden, I wasn't interested in toy soldiers anymore. And they never got taken out of their box ever again. So it's like that. You grow up, you play with dolls, and then all of a sudden, you know, you find boys. So you're not interested in playing with your dolls anymore. So you develop in life, you get older and you develop other interests. So similarly in spiritual life, you have an opportunity to get a higher taste. So in Krishna consciousness we chant Hare Krishna, we read nice books all about fascinating subject matters. And then, you know, the taste for watching TV or social media and eating all sorts of awful things, it doesn't really cross your mind anymore because you've got a fantastic diet, you've got great friends, you've got a great philosophy, you've got a nice clean lifestyle. Those things no longer attract you. You naturally stay away from them. It becomes a natural thing. Because when you have something better, raso varjam, raso pi asya, param drishtva nirvajate, Krishna says, you have something higher, you have a higher taste, naturally those lesser things are not attracted to you anymore. So that has to be there. If you don't develop a higher taste, you will fall back into your old ways. So that goes with any sort of addiction. With any sort of addiction. Unfortunately, in the world of addiction, it's like I have some friends who used to be alcoholics, and they, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous, they say you must never ever have another drink. And if you ever are walking past the pub and that little voice inside says go and have a drink, you cannot do it. You cannot do it. You must not do it. But if you haven't got a higher taste and you're not drinking other things which are much nicer and better for you, then the tendency is that you can always fall down, you can always fall back. So restraining yourself artificially is not successful. It may not be successful. It may be successful for some time, but because you still have a taste for it, you can easily fall back. So the idea is to get a higher taste, to taste something better, and then you think, what would I want to go to the pub for? I've got strawberry lassi at home in the fridge. Why would I want to drink some fermented black fluid called Guinness when I can have strawberry lassi? So it's a matter of getting a higher taste. Yes, at first you may be torn. Yes. At first you may find a struggle, but then as time goes on, it becomes easier and easier because you're more attached to those positive things. And sometimes on the path of spiritual life, sometimes you do fall back. Sometimes you slip, and that's understandable. But then you just pick yourself up and you dust yourself off and you keep going. And eventually, you won't fall over anymore, just like a young baby. Everyone who's got babies, you know, when babies first start to walk, it's a very big day in the world of family life. And it's a big day for the mother and the father and grandma and everyone that's there. And look, she's walking, yes, taking a few steps. What happens? She falls over, the baby falls over. So you don't say, useless. You say, no, come on, stand up, come on. And then they walk another few steps and they might fall over. But eventually, a few days later or a week later, whatever, the baby can stand up and walk right across the room and it doesn't fall over anymore. And then eventually you just walk normally. We don't walk, get up here at the Sunday feast and accidentally fall over on the floor because we've forgotten how to walk. We know how to walk and it's not an issue anymore. But in those early stages, we may slip. So it's like that with this world. We may have some addictions, we may have some attachments, we may have weaknesses for things which aren't really good for us. But we push on and we replace them. That's the most important. You have to replace them with something better. And if you do, eventually then you won't fall victim to those things anymore. So it's a science. Karam Drishvan Rivatati. One has to get a higher taste. So, any more quick questions? Otherwise, you have a question?
Two questions.
You have two questions. Okay.
About instinct.
Instinct.
Yeah, it's a built-in memory that is transferred by the gene. So it's a gene thing.
Says who?
That's how we have brown eyes or...
Oh, brown eyes, yes.
Yeah, you know, things like that.
Yeah. Genetic.
Genetic. It's connected to the
So how is it genetic that the baby...
It'll be transferred from the parent to the egg
Right.
into the baby.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a medical.
It's a medical. Okay. Well,
The second question is, some species...
but let me just say something about the medical. There's some speculation involved. Because, anyway, we won't go into that now. I know you're a firm believer in medical science. So, I must say though that there are many things which are impossible to understand about the world, the way the world is, and to simply write it off as genetics is sometimes somewhat of an excuse. There are some things which are not conceivable, but nevertheless, explaining it away by means of genes is convenient.
Yeah, but the parent might have blue eyes.
But anyway, what was the second question?
Okay, second question. Some species of fish,
Yes,
they go upriver.
they do.
With the trout and the sand.
They do.
And they lay the eggs high up in the river.
They do.
And they hatch out there
That's right.
in their security.
They do.
Because-
I was going to give that example, but I
and
forgot about that.
then they'll come down when
That's
they're
right.
born.
And the example is given in the Vedic literatures that whereas a fish, like the salmon, will swim against the current
Yes.
just because it's so determined to lay its eggs in the safe place, it will perform something which is almost impossible for someone with such a tiny little body. And that water is rushing so fast in the other direction, it defies reason how a fish can do it. And the example is given that an elephant, a huge animal like an elephant, can be swept away, because elephants do like to swim, and they're actually pretty good swimmers. But if an elephant enters a river and the torrential river is rushing all of a sudden, the elephant, the body of the elephant is huge, yet it will be washed away. Big, strong elephant will be washed away. But the salmon, he has a different sort of body, because his life, he belongs in the water, and by nature's arrangement, he will swim and lay his eggs
It's
against
design.
all
It's the
odds.
sharpness of the-
Yeah. So, by Krishna's arrangement, we're given a certain type of body to fulfill our needs. Just like a tortoise wouldn't survive, or a turtle wouldn't survive walking around so slowly when there are so many fast creatures there, like the fox, who can just devour it, tear its arms and legs off and feast on its flesh. So nature's arranged that he has a shell that he can immediately, arms and legs and head go in, and he survives. So by nature's arrangement, we're all being looked after. This is the point. We're here in the material world. We came here because we wanted to leave Krishna's association. Krishna says, okay. Just like a young boy, he says, I'm leaving home. And the parents say, look, you're too young to leave home. You're 14. You can't leave home at 14. But as they say, you know, kids, leave home now while you still know everything. Sometimes boys 14, 15, they leave home. Sometimes girls, they leave home because they know better. They think they know better. And the parents say, please don't go, please don't go. And the kids say, I'm going. So the parents say, okay, so then go, and you know, you'll be back soon. When it comes time for dinner, you'll be back. So go now. But then sometimes the children don't come back, and then the parents are always thinking about their lost children. So similarly, we've left the spiritual world, we're here in the material world, we don't belong here, this is not our real home. And Krishna was always waiting for the time that we come back. We come back to him. We've forgotten who our Father is. You leave home, you forget your parents, you go astray, you get involved in all sorts of terrible things, you forget about your parents, but your parents, they never forget about you. So similarly, Krishna is always thinking about us and waiting for the time for us to return to him. So we'll finish there. Thank you very much for listening. Now it's time for Arati and Kirtan. And then we'll have a couple of announcements, and then we'll have some sumptuous Krishna Prasad. So Hare Krishna.